This
is TLV1.
TLV1 radio.
Great mixture.
I like television.
This is still V1.
This is
Tel Aviv is a beautiful city.
Great city, great radio.
TLV1.
This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, where I, Gilad Halpern, engage in close encounters of the intellectual kind. On our show today, we have two fascinating guests. The first is Dr. Noah Efron, the founding chair of the program in Science, Technology and Society at Bar-Ilan University. He's also a fellow TLV1 broadcaster as well as a number of other things, but for the purposes of our show today, he's the author of the recently published A Chosen Calling, Jews in Science in the 20th Century. It was recently published in English by Hebrew Union College Press and Johns Hopkins University Press. Noah will give us his original take on a generations-long question. Why are Jews so smart? Our second guest will be Dr. Shaul Sapir, a geography professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and author of several books, including most recently Bombay, Exploring the Jewish Urban Heritage. It is the outcome of an unprecedented and meticulous research into the relatively obscure history of the predominantly Iraqi Jewish community in the Indian city. It dates back to the beginning of the 19th century. So we'll hear all about that, about the history, and about today. This is our show. Do stay with us. We'll be back after this musical break.
Here lies a city on fire, singing along the arsonist choir. Now here I go. It started with a spark and burned into the dark. Now here I go. There is a river I've found into the wild, under the ground. So here I go. A button on a string, and I heard everything. Now here I go. Well, oh, sweet ignition, be my fuse. You have no choice, you have to choose. Bid farewell to yesterday. Say goodbye, I'm on my way. But in the end we all come from what's come before. So here I go. Well, oh, sweet ignition, be my fuse. You have no choice, you have to choose. Bid farewell to yesterday. Say goodbye, I'm on my way. I threw it all away because I had to be what never was. Been so hungry I could lie. Took my word, I took your wine. And held you in my bloody hands. These rattle bones are rubber bands. Wash them in the muddy water. Looking for a dime, I found a quarter. But you can make me change my name. You'll never
You're listening to the Tel Aviv Review here on TLV1. Welcome back. I am now absolutely delighted to be joined here in the studio by Dr. Noah Efron, who is the founding chair of the program in Science, Technology and Society at Bar-Ilan University near Tel Aviv. But more importantly, he's the mastermind and the guiding light and the tour de force and what have you of the absolutely brilliant Promised podcast here on TLV1 Radio, our extremely thoughtful and erudite news review that I recommend you all to listen to. It's actually one of my two favorite shows here on TLV1. And if you haven't listened to it yet, don't waste your time on the Tel Aviv Review. Stop now and listen to the Promise podcast.
And I don't think of myself just as the what have you of that show. I'm the what have you in chief of that show.
Absolutely, I stand corrected. But he's also the author of the book A Chosen Calling, Jews in Science in the 20th Century. The book has appeared in English recently and were published by Hebrew Union College Press and John Hopkins University Press. Hello, Noah. And thank you so much for coming in. One thing, on top of being the what have you of the Promise podcast, one thing that I really am really jealous about is I don't understand how it is that you've cracked the code and you have more than 24 hours a day because you do so many things. It's absolutely amazing.
I have teams of uncredited graduate students who do all the work.
Right, imps as they're known. Anyway, so let's talk about your book, which is why I've invited you to the Tel Aviv Review, and look at the main premise of it, and that is that Jews played a disproportionate role in science in at least the 20th century, but even a bit beyond that, and we'll get to that in a minute, or a ridiculously disproportionate role, in the words of one of the scholars who addressed that question, and you quote in your book. Now, this question about Jews playing a disproportionate role it has been asked in the context of intellectual vocations in general, not only about hard science per se, and now thanks to your book I understand that this question has been addressed also in the past in regards to this, and maybe that would be a good place to start. Whether do you distinguish at all between the intellectual vocation in which Jews played a disproportionate role and science as part of it, or maybe a cousin, a sister, or how do you?
Well, I don't distinguish between them hermetically, certainly, and not, I don't think in principle, but I do think that different fields attracted Jews to different degrees, and so I don't think that it's the case that Jews simply excelled in intellectual fields in general. And the reason why I trouble to make that point is because I think that many people have argued and continue to argue to this day that Jews are just really smart. They're just really, really smart. And if you want to understand the history of Jews in the modern West, ever since they left the Pale of Settlement and left the shtetls, then the key fact to understand is we're just so fucking smart. And I think that way of explaining, that key to explaining Jewish success, misses the fact that in fact Jews excelled hugely in some areas and much less so in others, and that there have been many periods, including in the modern era, where Jews didn't seem so smart. And so rather than being an explanation, the image that we have of Jews being so smart is one thing that needs to be explained. And I'm interested in Jews in science in part because it seems to me to be absolutely paradigmatic. You quoted the scholar who says that they were ridiculously successful, and I think that's simply a fact. I mean, I think that if you take any crass measure that we have, and all the measures are crass, but they add up to a pretty compelling picture. If you take Nobel Prizes, for instance, Jews have overperformed to an astonishing degree, 2 orders of magnitude more than you'd expect, at least. And in some fields like physics, even more than 2 orders of magnitude more. And so then you have to ask the question, well, why Why is it?
So the explanation that we've often heard that Jews excel in are just remarkably intelligent is it because for reasons of Jewish tradition, scholarship, etc. they have been predisposed to this intellectual exercise.
Well,
but you think, as I understand your argument, that this is a facile explanation, that there's much more to it.
I think it's just wrong. There are two traditional explanations that go in the direction that you go in, and they're connected. One of them is a sociobiological and genetic connection. They say, look, the history of the Jewish people from the beginning of the Jewish people is one in which the smartest men were married to the richest daughters. And that if you always look in every town in Europe, you'd find that the best scholar was married to the daughter of the richest man and in the town. And as a result, then the smart genes could thrive more. They could raise more children. And so that's one explanation.
Is there such a thing as smart genes? It sounds...
No, of
it's
course,
like if you're a bodybuilder, your offspring will not be bodybuilders, right? It's something that is nurtured.
This is something that has been argued about for generations and will continue to be. And there's evidence in all directions. I think that it's likely that some forms of intelligence, certainly musical intelligence, have some genetic components, but and other forms of intelligence that are related to bookishness may have some genetic component. Though I do personally think that that's been so hugely overrated that we do best to ignore it. But I'm not sure that it's not there. So one explanation is that Jews have bred ourselves into being smart. And I think that's and the other explanation, and I'll explain why I think both of these are wrong, is not a genetic one, but it's a sociological one that says Jewish tradition has always highly valued learning, and as a result, Jews have acquired both the habit of learning and particular habits of learning that allowed them to excel once they got into the laboratory. So that the way that this goes is that generations of thinking that the most remarkable and praiseworthy thing that human beings can do is to study Talmud ended up, once Jews secularized, translating into excellence in physics as well and general bookishness. And the reason why I think both of these things are mistaken is, well, the sociobiological and genetic explanation seems to me to be wrong just in biological terms. There haven't been that many generations. I don't see how you could have bred that. But the other thing, the important thing to keep in mind, and I think that one book that I'm dying to have to see written is a history of Jewish ignorance and lack of intelligence. One thing to keep in mind is that if you looked at Jews in, say, 1870, the vast majority of us were uneducated, had few books on the shelf, and we were, in fact, always an extraordinarily literate culture, which means a high percentage of Jews learned how to read, but most of us didn't know very much beyond that. So the idea that somehow we all had these tendencies, these desires, these culturally inbred need to learn, and that translated into excellence in a laboratory seems nuts in both cases. First of all, because the premise isn't true. We didn't really have those traditions all the time. And second of all, because the translation is not such a simple thing. Why would being good at Talmud translate into being good at biology, chemistry, or physics?
So here's your petition between the intellectual endeavor and the scientific one, because here in order to do science, you need to undergo some sort of a transition. Whereas if you're a Talmud scholar and you become a philosopher, the transition is probably not as great as if you become a physicist.
Maybe, but because I cast doubt on the premise, because I don't really think that in the 19th century Jews were so successfully bookish, then I'm skeptical about that as well. I don't actually wish to say that all of those explanations are entirely wrong. I think that they're mostly wrong-headed, and I think that the pridefulness with which we drag them out every time another crop of Jewish Nobel laureates is announced it occludes a more important explanation.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a different explanation, and my explanation starts with looking at how Jews fit into the societies they find themselves at the beginning of the 20th century. There is this 20th century, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, there is this remarkable story of Jews leaving the actually numerically probably almost the majority of them, literally the Pale of Settlement, but leaving old traditional society and entering into the modern West at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the great pogroms in Russia are in the 1880s, and around then vast numbers begin to move to the United States and begin to move to other places. A small number move to Palestine, and then in time, at the beginning of the 20th century, and especially after the revolution, huge numbers of Russians moved from the hinterlands into new modern Russian cities or modernizing Russian cities. So this somewhere around the end of the 19th century through the second, third decade of the 20th century, Jews suddenly burst into new places in the modern world where they're all committed to building new worlds in various fashions. And I focus on, though these aren't the only stories, I focus on the three most important stories, I think, which are the Jewish attempt to build a new world in the new land of America, the Jewish attempt to build a new world in the new land of the Soviet Union, and the Jewish attempt to build a new world in the new Jewish land of Palestine.
Exactly. So those three cases that you tackle are all highly ideological. Is this because you see an inherent connection between ideology and science, or is it just the way they saw it?
Well, I think that there's not necessarily. I do think that science is never devoid of ideology of one form or another, but I wouldn't want to talk in general terms. I think at this particular moment, see, this story is kind of complicated. It has a lot of moving parts. This is also precisely this moment. Not coincidentally, precisely this moment is the moment when modern science as we know it begins to take form. You know, science in the 19th century, we tend to cast back and imagine that the science we know today existed forever, but that's of course not true. Even well after the birth of the scientific revolution, even well after Newton, science was a small-scale, gentlemanly pursuit among elites. It became a vast, modern, governmentally supported endeavor just in the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century. Modern science is coming into the modern world at the same time that Jews are coming into the modern world. And the ideologies of those two things become linked. Not just because they happen at the same time, but because I think that Jews see in this emerging new ideology of early 20th century science, they see an ideology that is hugely appealing to them and also could be immensely helpful to them as they try to create their new worlds in each of the three places.
Exactly. So, did you choose those three places because there were there was this ideological component, or is it because there were three perhaps textbook examples of modernism in the, I would say, even aesthetic sense, and in the fact that this was perhaps the three examples that paved the way for the modernization of the world throughout the 20th century? Well,
first of all, not to give myself too much credit, for the most part, I chose these examples because for the same reason that when the famous bank robber whose name slipped my mind was asked why he robbed banks, he said, because that's where the money is. That's where the Jews were.
Okay.
Not so much in Palestine. Numerically, there weren't that many Jews in Palestine, but Russia, the story of Jews in the 20th century, certainly Ashkenazi Jews, and I have to admit that my book is mostly an Ashkenazi story, but also the interaction of Jews and science in the first half of the 20th century is mostly an Ashkenazi, mostly a Western story. the overwhelming number of Jews could be found either in the United States or in the Soviet Union. There is a story that ends up hewing along pretty much the same lines that happens elsewhere in Western Europe as well, in France. And
I was
in
just
England.
going to. Okay,
but it's just a pretty marginal story compared to these huge stories of Jews in American science and in Soviet science. And the story of Palestine is something that's particularly interesting and particularly unique. Maybe exactly for the reason you said, maybe because it does have this blend of ideology, and you see in the ways in which science served the ideology, and that science also fed the ideology.
To what extent would you agree with the following statement that Jews were the first, perhaps, to understand that science or this sort of vocation is key to upward mobility, which is what makes modern societies what they are. So weren't the Jews there in those three places who realized that this is really the way forward? And 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 centuries later, we find that looking back, that they've arrived at this really tremendous feat. 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 decades later. Generations later. Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that they were the first ones, but they were hugely enthusiastic about this in a way that that few other social groups were, and there were others also. Now, among the people who are deeply committed to promoting this new view of science, there were many people who were not Jewish as well. I write in the book about how the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Foundation in the United States were crucial in insisting that modern science be divorced from the old exclusionary wing chair Protestantism that you'd find in the clubs. Mm-hmm. So they were not Jews, obviously, but I think that Jews were at the forefront of a vanguard of people who saw science as a way of creating a more meritocratic society. Mm-hmm. And that was true in the United States. That was also true in the Soviet Union. Because it served perhaps a sociological need that they, as a minority group, were after. Exactly. So you have science. Promoting this ethos that says researchers should not be judged by who they are. They should be judged by what they produce. And they begin to introduce, for instance, this new method called blind refereeing, where the quality of your work is judged by people who don't know who you are. They don't know, if it's true that on the internet no one knows if you're a dog, in blind refereeing, no one knows if you're a Jew or if you're a Catholic or if you're a Protestant. And so this ethos of science said, we are a pure meritocracy. We judge things on the basis of their truth and on the basis of how well they work, and that is it. Mm-hmm. So, and it was among scientists that someone like Einstein, who was the exact opposite of what until then was every cultural hero in the United States, Einstein becomes this huge international cultural hero, and because he has produced work of such surpassing human value, such universal significance that no one can ignore, and then the fact that he's Jewish, the fact that he doesn't wear socks, the fact that he's so direct, the fact that his hair is uncombed, all of these things don't matter at all. And in the end, they feed back and they suggest that, okay, look, the scientist is somebody who is not the society person. Mm-hmm. So you Protestants can stay in your clubs if you wish, but the people doing science are going to be people who are not at all going to pay attention to whether you're a Protestant or whether you're a Jew. And that had huge appeal for an immigrant class of people who are trying to be recognized as Americans, as human beings. Because I'm asking you, to what extent were the Jews really instrumental in popularizing science? Not only, the fact that to make it more comprehensible to the masses, but also in making this perhaps the ideological aspect of science more accessible to lay citizens. I think enormously. I think that they were
deeply committed in general to this project of creating meritocratic, pluralistic societies that did not judge people by the color of their skin, but rather by the content of their character. And they saw science as being a tool of this. And consequently, to this day, American Jews are vastly, in vast numbers, opposed to teaching, say, intelligent design in schools. And it's largely because they view as an affront to their image of what society should be the attempts to try to sneak religion back into schools. Jews from the very beginning of the 20th century were among the most vocal leaders of saying, our society has got to be a neutral society. It's got to be a progressive society. It's got to be a scientific society. And we all have to leave things like religion and like our particularist identities outside, elsewhere. We can do that, in the privacy of our own homes, in our own clubs, in our own churches. But our society needs to be a scientific society.
Yeah, well, no, Efron, I'm afraid this is all we have time for, even though I can, I could have easily spent the rest of my life having this conversation.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. The What Have You of the Promise podcast here on TLV1, and the author of A Chosen Calling, Jews in Science in the 20th Century, that was recently published by Hebrew Union College Press and Johns Hopkins University Press. Noah Efron, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
אני הולכת, כבר כתבתי עלינו אין ספור שירי פרידה, אני הולכת, וכשהולכים אין דרך חזרה, טרקתי את הדלת, יושבת על זה עוד רגע, מורידה את המים וחוזרת, אתה יודע כמה פעמים ביום אני זורקת אותך, אבל אני קוסמת, כל פעם שאתה מחזיר מבט, אני איתו חוזרת, אתה עובר ומביא לי נשיקה, כמה מחוזרת טיפשה, ואז תצלום אישה על השידה מזכיר לי שאני בוגדת. זו פעם ראשונה שאני מעיזה להשתמש במילה הזאת, אבל לכל דבר יש שם ולזה קוראים מאהבת. תגיד, אתה באמת חושב שאתה האחד שלי ושאני האחד שלך? כי אם לא זה משחק ממש מוזר, ובכלל אני בדרך אל הדלת, אל הדלת. שמת לב שהלכתי, מרגיש בחסרונים מול הטלוויזיה, שעזבתי הכל ושכחתי הכל וניתקתי מכל הכבלים ואני אתפוגג לנגד עיניך. אני הכי טובה בלהגיד שאני הולכת כשאני עומדת לו בעצם מהספה, זה נשמע הכי טוטלי, פטלי, בלי דרך חזרה. אני הולכת, אני נשכבת רגע, לא, אני הולכת, אני אוהבת רגע, לא, אני הולכת, אני חושבת יותר מדי, אני הולכת,
You're listening to TLV1, broadcasting from Tel Aviv on TLV1.fm, and you're listening to the Tel Aviv Review. Welcome back. I am now joined here in the studio by Dr. Shaul Sapir, who's a geography professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's the author of numerous books, including most recently Bombay, Exploring the Jewish Urban Heritage. It was recently published in English by the B'nai Israel Heritage and the Genealogical Research Center in India. Hello, Shaul, and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, good morning.
So, this book is not really the typical research book. It actually looks more like a photo album or a coffee table book. It's big, it's printed on quality paper, and it's complete with hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures, old and new. But at the same time, it's the outcome of a meticulous historical study about the origins of the Jewish community in the western Indian city of Bombay, whose origins are predominantly Iraqi, Baghdadi. Now, you've said that your book seeks to fill a void because the history of the community hasn't been thoroughly studied until now. And indeed, you make quite a few discoveries in it, but we'll get to that in a minute. Before we do, I'd like to ask you, why do you think that the history of the Baghdadi community in Bombay hasn't been thoroughly studied till now?
I would first like to refer to the coffee table book. It is a research book.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
a totally research book with 600 sources. Very few books in the world you have with 600 sources and 700 footnotes. And I think so that really a very deep, thorough research has been done over here. As a matter of fact, the first time, I think so, ever, at least on this subject.
But why is that? Why did we have to wait? Humanity had to wait until 2013.
Well, they waited for a historical geographer to write it. You know?
Okay.
Because all the books are in this format. Most of them are basically one is copying from the other. At least 20, 30, 40% are copies. And this book was researched in the archives of the British Library for 1 year and 3 months in the archives of architects in London and 3 months in India, various archives. And obviously, talking to people and interviewing people, at least 50 people of the Baghdadi origins in Bombay, where they are spread all over in London and Australia, Israel.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So how many people are we talking about who are the descendants of this illustrious community?
Yeah, at the height of its existence in Bombay, we are talking about, let's say, 5,000-6,000 people, while the Bnei Israel was about 25,000, the Cochin Jews about 3,000. And,
but the community in Bombay, the special thing about it, or one of the special things about it, was that it wasn't originally from there. They actually came from, I wouldn't even say neighboring Iraq, but they came from overseas and settled in Bombay and set up this
the
community.
The time period is about the end of the 18th century, and basically we can start the Baghdadi period over there, the white Jews, from 1832 when David Sassoon arrived from Iraq, Baghdad, through Bushehr. And he came to Bombay, and that's the beginning of the dynasty, of the Sassoon dynasty, which was about 3-4 generations. But just to refer to why you said it so important, what happened to the Baghdadi community, why they didn't research about that, and why they didn't find interest. The Cochin were like a kind of, I would say, strange to the white people that came to India.
They are, just to say, a more indigenous Jewish community.
They are really. People found much deep interest in the Cochin and Bnei Israel people, while the Baghdadis were known all over. Arab countries. When you say Baghdadi Jews in Bombay, you basically relate to people that came from Arab countries, basically.
Yeah.
If it's Baghdad, if it's Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Aden. Places like that, Afghanistan. So they didn't find interest in the Baghdadi Jews. And only when the Sassoons began to build what they were building, it's by itself, it's an enormous contribution, which we'll refer later on. And I think so that's really, as small the community was, I would say that their interest they found with the British people there, it was much deeper than the Bnei Israel and the Cochin Jews. Cochin Jews were on the Malabar coast in the south, and the Bnei Israel was around Bombay and the Konkan villages and towns. So I would say that the Baghdadi people were involved with the British in a way, maybe because of the color, maybe because of their contribution, of the wealth.
Is this also why they were associated with colonialism that later led to the demise of the community?
Well, and so they were so related because, they made the fortune, I would say, in trade of opium trade and textile. They were the large textile owners in India, the Baghdadi, the Sassoons. And as a matter of fact, the largest textile factory was a Sassoon factory in all India. They had about 4,000 people working over there. It's amazing. And of its kind. And obviously, we would say that their contribution was almost in every field, and not only for the community, but also for the others, the Indians, the Persians, whoever that dwelt in India.
Okay, so let's take it perhaps in a chronological way. So, what would be the beginning of the Jewish community, of the Baghdadi community in Bombay? Is that Sassoon's arrival, or can you trace it to even before that?
No, there were some before, but they didn't have that influence like the Sassoons, because the Sassoons, if you call the community with all its functions that the community has, what the word community means, you would say that before Sassoon there was almost nil.
That was in the beginning of the 19th century.
Yeah, it's about 1832 when David Sassoon arrived because of persecution in Baghdad, as usual. I mean, this is what happens when when the Jews move from place to place.
Yeah.
And David Sassoon was imprisoned in Baghdad, and his father had to pay a huge ransom to get him out. But when he was out, his father arranged a ship to take him to Bushehr, and he told him, "You're not going to stop in Basra, because via Basra he went to Bushehr, because the people know who you are and they would like you to stay and to remain and be the head of the community."
Why was he arrested in
He was
Iraq?
because there was a new Pasha over there, Dawood Pasha, and he knew the way to get money is to put...
Right, because they were already famous and rich.
Very famous for generations. You can say that his father was the chief of finance, and his grandfather and great-grandfather, and so on went for generations. Jews were very involved. As a matter of fact, at the time, there was more than 50% Jews in Baghdad. So he knew, the new Pasha, that on the support of two other Jews that helped him to dispose from the Ottoman region, because at that time it was under Ottoman Empire. Baghdad, as Eretz Israel, as other places in the surrounding area, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, which is today. And all that is called Kolat Surya, okay? That what today you can see they want to renew the caliphate in these areas and so on. But that was how to say in brackets.
Yeah.
So they knew that is the way that they can really get the finance, the money to, and David Sassoon did not really remain. And 6 hours after he left towards Bushehr, the soldiers of Dawood Pasha came to look for him, but it was too late. He was not there.
Okay.
And he remained 4 years. Then he got his parents to Bushehr, his whole family, and from there to Bombay, because it was safe under British rule.
Right. So then that was really the thing that sowed the seeds of the Jewish community in Bombay. What was their relationship to the British rulers throughout the the next century or so?
Yeah, I would say that the British were very tolerant, and Jews had more access to British institutes than anyone else, even not the Persians, the Parsi as they were called, and obviously not the Bnei Israel, and not though the Bnei Israel served in the British Army. It was not British because it was under the East Indian Company. And the East Indian Company governed, you can say, military governed and civil government and so on, till 1858, till the Sepoy mutiny of the Sepoy are the Indian soldiers serving in the East Indian Army. And after the mutiny, it passed over, all India passed over under to the British, monarchy.
Yes.
Yeah, Queen Victoria to the British.
Mm-hmm.
So the Baghdadi were...
And as rich Jewish merchants, did they enjoy, I'm assuming that they enjoyed some sort of privileged status in India.
Yeah, see, the British could not deal with opium at the time, so they had to give it to the Persians and to the Jews.
Right.
Because it was legitimate, it was fine. They could deal with it, but not the British. So I would say that was really the reason why also they went to Shanghai and where they went to, they explored to different places. And they succeeded very well with that.
What are some of the discoveries, the unprecedented findings that you have come across during your research? Give us like the two, perhaps two or three most significant examples
of their contribution.
No, yeah, of the discoveries of unknown historical facts that you've unveiled.
I wrote at the preface of the book that this book should have been written about 20, 30 years earlier. And but if would have been written 20, 30 years later, I think so it will be a totally different book. Because not enough people that you can you get information from them, that you interview. And many things have been forgotten in the meantime. Like A knows what B doesn't know and C knows what D doesn't know. So you had to collect all this information, and it was a tremendous amount of, I would say, work, because you can't rely on everything what they say. And the depth of time also has quite an emphasis on what you have to do in your research and to find and to make an analogy of different studies and so on. And when I began, there was nothing to write about, because, the thing was that they were not aware about the community. They went to work and came back to the house and supplied whatever the money for buying and surviving. And though the situation was quite well, but they were not aware about, you can say, functions that matters, preserving, what they were doing for the future and so on. So you really had to... I read about 150 books, travelers' books on Bombay, before writing the first word.
Right.
And there was not enough material.
Nothing about the Jewish community. I mean,
not much.
You wanted to familiarize
to
yourself
what
with
is Bombay.
Right.
Yeah.
Is this part of your work as a geographer? I mean,
no,
I'm trying to to understand something maybe about the methodology.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, because I'm really trying to, say this is a side product. I teach about Eretz Israel in the modern era, which is from Muhammad Ali, or even before Napoleon's invasion to Israel in 1799, the past 200 years. And on Jerusalem throughout the ages, because I also have a degree in archaeology, so I studied 1 year in the Technion architecture, so I can really allow myself to write on various subjects, and I do have about more than 70 articles that deal with a wide range of subjects from Canaanite period till modern times.
So how did this lead you to Bombay? Or how did this contribute to your endeavor?
Yeah, I was born in Bombay. I'll come to your question about 3-4 important things, but before, just to give a small introduction, I had a feeling for many years that whatever was written, any book that mentions Jews in India, they really neglect the Baghdadi community. Like I would say in percentages, briefly, 50% is about the Cochin Bnei Israel Jews, 40% the Cochin Jews, and 10% that is left is about the Baghdadi Jews. Among that, the two communities in Calcutta and in Bombay had 2% and Calcutta 8%, which means that I would want to really even this on the scale, the information on the Baghdadi Jews of Bombay. So on a trip that I did with my wife, Anne, in I think so it was 1997, I saw the statue of David Sassoon, full-size statue in David Sassoon Library and Reading Room in the Kalagora Square in Bombay, historical Bombay. And I told my wife, I said, I'm picking up the glove. She didn't understand what I'm talking about. I said, well, I'm going to write about the Jewish Baghdadi community on Bombay, because really nothing is serious. Nothing is done about them, and nobody knows about this community.
Yeah.
Because being born in Bombay, I decided that is my task as a historical geographer, that I could fill in this
You were born in Bombay, but you moved to Israel as a child.
At the age of 9.
Did you grow up with memories of life in Bombay? Was it something that you see as part of your identity, of your culture, of your tradition?
Yeah, briefly, because, anybody that moves from place to place, he takes with him, some of the material that, that he remembers. But when I reached Bombay after 44 years being absent from Bombay, it was kind of I would say, I felt at home. Not much has been changed. I'm not talking about the poverty, but when you look at the surroundings, the buildings, the streets, the roads, it's all basically all the same. Besides that, they moved the tram instead of tram. Today all these taxis and rickshaws and so on. But I decided that it's time that somebody should really write something serious.
Yeah.
And
okay, so now about really the findings, because we will have to wrap up soon. So about like
I owe you something.
Yeah.
Ask me what are the 3-4 important
exactly.
things.
So tell us what really where did this study lead you in terms of substantial historical research?
See, first, it's to really document the heritage. It was never documented. And I think that is important for the future because, you have all the structures. If it's a wide range of topics such as religious structures and education and health and landmarks, which quite a few of Jewish contribution today.
Like what?
Landmarks like the Gate of India, the David Sassoon Library, Flora Fountain, which has nothing to do. This is also something that I found in the research. Flora Fountain, nothing to do with Flora Sassoon, but the Jews insist that is her name. It was basically Floral Fountain, and it was.
Is that David's wife?
It's the niece of David Sassoon. And she was married to Solomon Sassoon. So the Jews insisted that it's not floral, but it's flora. Who could build something like that if not the Sassoons?
Right.
And this was a shock to many Jews that when they realized that it's not Flora Sassoon. And another example, the Gateway of India, which is a landmark, and people did not know really that it was a contribution, a huge contribution of the Sassoon family, and the Kalagora, which is another, Kalagora's black horse. Yeah. That's a statue that was given by Albert Sassoon in 1876 in honor of his father and so on. And today the square is well known all over India. It's like how to say, Times Square in New York.
Are people in today's India, in today's Bombay, appreciative of the Jewish contribution? Are they aware of it at all? Is it something that,
definitely.
that's India as well?
Definitely, because, the governor of Maharashtra state, 100 million people over there, he sent a limousine to get me from the hotel to his office and to meet the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Transportation, and I was given a few tasks which, I was happy to handle with it, such as to mark and to write historical plaques on all the important buildings of Bombay, a sound and light show in the most prestigious museum in Bombay, Prince of Wales Museum.
Right.
And to do a kind of exhibit, in different towns in the different countries, and about the book, the topics of the book, with about 24 to 30 plaques on the topics of the books.
So your book is there in a way to redress some sort of historical injustice and bring Bombay, the Jewish community of Bombay, back on the map.
Yeah, absolutely. See, talking about the impact that it made, it's enormous. Like the Times of India, one of the best books ever written on Bombay.
Right.
And other newspapers that really they gave a lot of credit to that. And I think so that it opened a window large window to people that had no idea what was Jewish Bombay. And such a small community.
And also, I have to congratulate you because, I might have offended you saying that it looks like a coffee table book, but it's really, it's really accessible, and I'm sure that it will echo far, far beyond the captive audience of people who are interested in academic writing or historical geography, etc. But I'm afraid we have to leave it there.
Okay.
Dr. Shaul
Thank
Sapir,
you.
a geography professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the author of Bombay, Exploring the Jewish Urban Heritage. Thank you so
Gilad.
much.
Thank you, Gilad.
That was the Tel Aviv Review for this week. Thank you very much for listening. Also, big thanks to our technical producer, Leo Peleg. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. In the meantime, do not forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And do not hesitate to get in touch with your comments and suggestions to Gilad, Gilad, at tlv1.fm. I am Gilad Halpern, signing off now here in Tel Aviv. Do join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. Goodbye.
דלת מול דלת באותן השעות, מאחורי אחת הארוחות מלאות, ובגב השנייה געגוע מורעב למקום ולזמן אחר, לא כאן לא עכשיו, רגל מול רגל באותו המגרש, אחד בועט בכדור, אחר נסוג בחשש, ילדות אחת של שמש ושנייה של צללים, החברות מברזל, החלומות נזילים, לאהבה יש פנים וגם הרבה מסכות, מה שנסתר מהשמש מתגלה בלילות, כשהאגרוף הסגור ויום אחד ייפרם, אז יתגלה בעולם אבל אחר ייעלם. לאהבה יש פנים וגם הרבה מסכות, מה שנסתר מהשמש מתגלה בלילות, כשהאגרוף הסגור ויום אחד ייפרם, אז יתגלה בעולם אבל אחר ייעלם. רגש מול רגש, אנשים אחרים, המלחמות הן דבק, השמחות מסמרים, לאחד יש בית, לשני רק טובות, שמנת ושוליים,